Okay, so as I clearly remember, it was the responsibility of being privileged, and as it was quite a large topic, we came to the conclusion that we wanted it to be related to the art school or art education.
Okay. So the responsibility of being privileged. It came in. Do you have it? Okay. No. It came into my mind because I was already at school, first having this ideology of, okay, I was educated so well now in this German school, and I feel like I kind of in some way want to bring it back, and which is a very, again, a very interesting idea where I already kind of put up my standard of education above other standards of education, because I say, okay, I will give this back to something. So I also initiated, I got it from somewhere, which would be to me connected to the idea of privilege. So the idea that you get something which you were not really fully supposed to get, and then the idea of responsibility, okay, so I should give this back to have an exchange of energy, whatever. And so what I did as a young person coming from school, I also really wanted to go traveling, but I thought also the traveling I connect with getting into contact with cultures where I think which are less privileged than me, to just figure out what does it mean to be privileged. And went I think many people did it doing volunteer work or just going to schools, and gave English classes to kids then, or was in an orphanage, or also built a school after the earthquake in Nepal. Because on one hand side it was also a very personal interest to just in the culture and to traveling and having a cheap way of traveling. But then on the other side I was also interested, okay, what does it mean to be privileged? What are these cultures? And is there something I can give to them they profit from? And is this also my kind of something I must do, something I must do to give answer to a kind of guilt I think I have through being privileged. And then coming here to the art school, I think also studying art is one of the most privileged things you can do, as you don't really know where it's going to lead you. Nobody of us knows if we're going to have a job, if we're going to earn some money, but we all can say, okay, that's fine, we can take the risk, because we have some kind of safety boundaries. I think nobody of us thinks, okay, if I won't make it as a big artist, I will be homeless at the street, because we all are educated in a way that we can work in a coffee shop maybe, or in a restaurant, or as a secretary somewhere. We will all find a way through, and which is also again a kind of being privileged, that you have this safe space, you have a base on which you can build up to explore uncertainty. And I thought, with exploring this uncertainty, does there come a responsibility with it? So using my safety, using my energy to create something new, does this also make me responsible of bringing what I created new back to the world where my safety boundary is? Simple thing, my parents feed me until I'm 18, or maybe even longer. They finance my studies. So when they are old, is it my responsibility to feed them? So this would be one of the most simple structures. But then you can also go further and say, okay, we have the privilege to study art, which is to a lot of people who are working, who are paying taxes, which is through the whole school system, which is exploiting maybe intelligent people for a very bad wage, such as teachers then. And with everything there comes also the idea of exploitation with it in some way, I think, which then we can profit of in having a good education, or having enough money to study art. So, and then is the question, once we studied art, do we have the responsibility to bring the generated work in contact with the source, which enabled us to do the work, to also enable the source again to get enriched by our work? So is there a circle we have to close, which would happen through privilege, responsibility, closing the circle? Yeah.
Okay, but I mean, when you're talking about this, I feel like it's way more in your like experience of life that you're talking about the fact of being privileged.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're talking about like strictly the fact that, as you said, you and your parents have enough money to pay for your study, then how does concretely you can manifest this responsibility by being either an art student or an artist? Because I mean, as you said, when you traveled and stuff like this, you share your knowledge, you share stuff you own that you want to make people profit, because you feel like this is a privilege and a will that you have to share it. But concretely, how would you see it manifest in like your practice or like whatever?
As it's a very complex system we're talking about, and which is very hard to narrow down on just the relationship to my parents and me, which I gave for an example before. I think just anything which would contribute or which would make other people profit from your work is already an answer on that. So when I look, for example, at Studium Generale, there was this woman who did an art project at the nursery home to make old people feel like they're sitting in a train, so they're not that bored. Stuff like that. Ways you kind of create social good with art. But then also, I mentioned also this volunteer thing and the third world development help, because I think it's also a very interesting issue to talk about if it is really help you're doing there, in a way, as if do you really have the connection I have, for example, with my parents? It's a very obvious. No, that's not true. Okay, cut this. Doesn't make sense.
Okay, no, sure, but maybe let's stick a bit to the art school related stuff, so we can because
No, but I still think. Sorry to interrupt you. No, continue.
No, because I was just thinking like, of course, like if you look at all the education and you have and stuff like this, and how privileged financially you are and stuff, but I just feel like it can go like everywhere in the social part that you are saying, but yeah, I just felt like it was also interesting, and this is where I wanted to ask you after, like, how would you then say that an art practice is not an irresponsible one? Because you can still find a social part in art in every way. Like you can say that you're making art so you can make people, like, I don't know, feel things, or either experience things, or use things, you know, there's like, you can, but when would you say that then it's not, I mean, I'm not saying you have the answer, but where would you say that it's like irresponsible in a way?
Because it seems like an oversimplification to say that like only like social art projects where you're like involving communities and things are contributing to society, like even by being like the way our system works seems to be more a thing that we value education as a thing that makes people be helpful contributors to society, like in general. So that's why it makes sense as like, yes, we're responsible to kind of do whatever we're doing to the best of like how we can do it, but it doesn't have to be like in such a direct way.
So what you're saying is that also just like doing your work in the very best way is already giving.
Yeah, I suppose that's what, like, that feels more like what our responsibility is, rather than say like going into like a nursing home and making old people feel happy.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, this is just a. But I was also wanting to focus more on the question as if there is actually such as responsibility, and maybe we can make a round and see what everything personally thinks about it. Like, because I find this is a very interesting point, if we actually can think in these terms that there is this responsibility we have to answer to.
Yeah, but to me it's very interesting to think about the fact that being artists and being in an art school allow us to think about ourselves and our processes and our identities in deeper ways than someone that is for example, going into another type of profession.
Mm-hmm.
And this makes sense, or at least sparked questions when you said that coming here was in a way more privileged because you don't have like a chance to you have like the safety of even if you don't succeed as a great artist, you can work as anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, I don't know if like I understand what you're meaning, but is that like true? Is that reasonable? Because I think that someone that has studied, for example, law, I don't know if that person is automatically like less privileged in a way.
No.
Or not less privileged, because obviously privilege is not something that changes by the profession you choose or what you study. But if it really like, if the responsibility changes from being like an artist and being like a lawyer, for example.
But I think this is interesting because the lawyer already gives back something he studied. Like, because the lawyer studies law to then be a lawyer to help people go through their course. And this is already something where he's studying something and then he has kind of a service.
Yes.
And this is maybe what differs the usual lawyer from what we do as an artist. But you could also relate what you were just saying to any type of research. And you were saying, okay, we do research about identity, about matter, about whatever, perception. And this is our kind of research, so maybe it's also the question if any kind of research does initiate, it has to bring something back, or it has to contribute to society in any way. But also in this discussion, as Morgan said before, we wanted to specifically focus on the art school.
No, but I mean, it's all linked because I feel like nowadays the reasons why our art school and our like artists and whatever are so like have such a like less value in people's mind. It's also because they feel like art is still something really like romantic and like egoistic. Yeah, on the like painting in my room alone and like just giving attentions to my feelings. And this is why I mean people like have a lot of this idea in mind. So maybe that's the reason why also they feel like it's a privileged thing because it's an egoistic thing. But nowadays, as we can see in this school or either in contemporary art, it's much more about like responsibility. I feel like it's about like identity, social problems, political problems. It has so much more to say. So it's kind of linked anyway. But I mean, yeah, it's definitely I feel the same responsibility as a lawyer, and specifically nowadays with contemporary art, I feel like it's either way always responsible. But still, I just come back to the question I had, like, then to what extent can you say it's not responsible? Like, I don't want to talk to you about it, like, I mean, it's up to you, but like, for example, with this Chirac event, you can tell that this artist has some visibility, so they have some responsibility, but they're irresponsible, in my opinion, in the way they express stuff.
Which also creates their visibility.
Yeah, no, sure. Yeah. But I mean, just talking about, like, for example, irresponsible way of like giving yourself visibility by doing art. So yeah, it was just to give like a random example of like
the abuse of this.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, maybe it has nothing to do with the subject, but when I thought about like the responsibility of being in an art school and stuff, of course, because like yes, I have the chance to do this study. This is surely not something I would do if I didn't know that my parents would be offering me some comfort. Because, for example, being a lawyer, this is something, I mean, you do with lots of interest, but you can, like, I mean, I'm not doing cliché or whatever, but you can have much more safety in your life by doing law study than by doing art study. So it's really like having the chance to take the risk, I'd say.
Yeah.
And, yeah, so then when you take that risk, because you have the chance to take it, do you really like have also the clear responsibility to say something out loud that a lot of people can have the possibility to say or to think or whatever? But yeah, maybe I already kind of answered my own question by saying that contemporary art is much more linked to that. But yeah, I don't know if someone has something.
I also find interesting what Roem was saying before, that we can use this art school as a platform to also research identity and all these cases. And I think as soon as this is already a thing, like as soon as the research is already on identity, on I don't know, social structures, whatever, on issues which are right now in the daily world, then it's maybe already through just doing the research, doing the effort to ask questions, it already contributes in some way to the world outside of an art school, because topics are being touched which can't be touched in a daily life of an office worker maybe, and yeah, I think this is also just interesting aspect.
Yeah, I think that also what I feel is very interesting is that also going back to the question of what is like the responsibility of an artist or like for example of art students in an art school towards society, which is like a more complex question than just for example what we talked about before, like more conventional professions, is the fact that we research, for example, identity or our own selves, or how we work in a community, how we work like towards a goal, makes us actually, to me, pretty aware of psychology issues that also has been like seen in very, very big ways in platforms such as YouTube and this like thing called the School of Art. No, the School of Life, excuse me, which has had like a huge amount of success in really representing questions and very deep struggles that people have to face in their lives. And they found in that some solutions and some answers to their questions. And I feel that that is just one of the many interpretations of how not art students, but artists, because actually the ones that developed this project came from very diverse surroundings. So yeah, I think that also I would love to hear like everyone else input on how like our, let's say, branch of thinking and of research can actually help society, and what our responsibilities. And
I just want to come back to what you're saying, to say that I feel like the responsibility of the mediation of art is really important. It just brings me back to a debate we had at the beginning of the year where we were talking about like the responsibility of an artist to actually make his works explicit, either if it is intellectual or conceptual.
What do you mean by explicit?
Like make it like accessible,
okay,
not only to an elitist surrounding, by making like by making really hard text to understand, and by making it like super like so like, because I was mentioning this at the beginning of the year, but there's like this kind of paradox all between what institutions want and what they really are, like giving a free accessible or like a ridiculous amount of money, like 20 euros per year for going to a museum, but once you go to the museum, it's like you cannot understand if you don't have a certain education. So it's kind of like it's accessible for everyone, but at the same time they do not make that much effort to make it like accessible to anyone. And when you give the example of the School of Life, it's like really simple talks of subjects, and it makes a lot of people actually like understand things better and like make them feel at ease about some subject. And I feel like this is something that also artists has to do in a certain way.
But in a way, like there's danger of then dumbing things down.
Yeah, definitely.
When
because that's part of a like.
No, but that makes it like super like, but like at least like not making it too elitist, so it doesn't like afraid people to approach.
It's just a very difficult balance between like in order to express complex ideas and things, that requires a certain level of education, and that's like just the way it is.
No, sure, but I mean you can still use. I feel like you can still use, because I feel like these are really linked to like sociological or political or identical problems, so it can interest actually everyone. And I'm not saying we have to make it like kind of like stupid in a way we're expressing it. But I feel like, for example, maybe it's not our work, maybe it's the museum's work or the, I don't know, teacher works or whatever, but to make it explicit in a way that everyone can relate to it, because I feel like the responsibility part in it is that I had the chance to have this freedom of making art in my life, but I don't want it to be accessible to people who doesn't have this chance. This is a bit like how I feel about it. It's more like maybe art saved my life because this is the only like school I could be in, this is the only things I could do, but like I don't want to make it like, oh, it's not I don't want to make it accessible, but it's like just like I don't make efforts in making it understandable and accessible to everyone.
I think here it's really interesting to again relate the idea of the artist as a researcher, because when you look, for example, as physicians, how do you say that? Physicians, who like if they would need to explain every step they take in their mathematical or physical research, they would never go that far as they are now. So what you have there is you have laboratories where people can do research just as free as possible. They get supplied with material and they can just run for it. And then they have a product in the end, or like an effect, something to show. And then people come to translate it again back. And I think this, like, the first step is the same in here in art school. Like, we get supplied with materials, with teachers, with ideas, and then we can just run for it and see what happens. And but the second part, the translation, is not there yet. And this is maybe an interesting part where you mentioned also the museums, which could be there, more of a bigger role in that.
But I think it's still. I think the kind of translation that you're talking about, where say you then have like ideas about physics that are explained, or like something that comes out of something that's helpful to society that comes out of this like physics research. It's all quite vague, but like I still think that in the same way, art that's happening, say like in an intellectual like circle that doesn't dribble directly down to everybody else, that still has effects on the rest of the world in kind of possibly a comparable way, without necessarily everybody having to go to the museum to see the art. Yeah, but I mean, don't you like? I mean, for example, from my like closet surrounding, or even like people that don't know anything about art, there's this like big misunderstanding about like what art is nowadays, and it's more like how I got in that contemporary museum. I got there, and what did I pay for? Like, come on, you know. And this creates just like an even big more like, I completely agree.
Like whatever hole between art and life, and art student and life, and whatever, and I think it's just a problem kind of explanations.
But it does, and it is. I think partly it probably is a responsibility of the people who are doing the communication. So but like museums, but also that's just. I also think a thing about like education, like it's at like a lower level that you need to tackle the problem.
Sure, it's for example for me, but this is another subject for me. Like history of art should be on the same level as history. So, but this is another topic. But just like so, people could be a bit more like easily aware of what it is, and it's not something that is so like abstract to them. So people would just like have like similar references and stuff like this, so they could easily get to know it better. But also, you said maybe it's the problem of the person who does the communication. If the artist makes it accessible, I don't think that the person who does the communication would make it like hard to understand just to make it more like, you know. I mean, I don't want to say that. I mean, artists has to make their language more easy or whatever, but make it more like accessible.
But I think it's super complicated to like. I think it's a bit of a problematic idea to say that it has to be accessible, because now, I mean, before I was in class, I wasn't just not listening, and I was like going from like Twitter to this place to this place to this place, and then within like 5 minutes of scrolling down Twitter, I was like having access to all those names of like poets that I had heard of, but like never actually typed in Google. And then I just typed their name in Google, and then in 3 minutes I can have access to like a whole lot, like 25 pages of their poems, you know. Like the problem, I think, it's like it's not about accessibility. It's about making people having this will to, like, because it's accessible to everyone. Like, if I tell my kid who Emily Dickinson is, and like they want to search for that poem and they know how to type it, like they can just go and check her poems, and if they want to, like, I don't know, if they want to see like, oh, this Paul Klee painting, they can just like type it in Google. I think it's not about accessibility.
Yeah, it's about mediation.
It's about, yeah, I think it's
about mediation.
The problem, and this is what you kind of like pointed out, I think the idea, the main problem is that as long as the art education and the art world are going to be considered things that you can't really take seriously, because the value of like such education, or I don't know, for example, like when you talk about like art education, when you say like, oh yeah, we are like privileged to do this, and we have like, maybe our degree doesn't have the same value as the one of someone who studied law, but I think it's also like a matter of like perspective. And it's like when you say that my degree in art, like I have a degree in fine arts, I have a bachelor, I know it's worth nothing, but I also have friends who have like a bachelor in law, and it's worth nothing if they don't do anything with it afterwards, you know. Like in France, if you just have a bachelor in law, you can't do anything. Like, you can't do anything. So it's just a matter of perspective and like how you, I mean, I don't know.
No, sure, but that's like kind of like just another way of like saying what is your bachelor worth something. But just talking about like accessibility, I totally understand. Yeah, everything is accessible, but it's definitely more about like how you make people, as you said, approach it. Mm-hmm. And sorry, but it doesn't appeal anyone who doesn't know anything about art when you see like hell complicated text about something that makes no sense, and when yourself get more into the artist, because I myself like maybe 3 years ago was really like, oh my god, contemporary art, self bullshit, I want to do art, but I'm much more into modern art, I don't understand whatever. And then I got myself into understanding like contemporary artists, seeing what kind of like also contemporary artists that are not shown in the public space are also really interesting. It makes interesting stuff, whatever. So I got into that, but because I had the chance to get into it. So I'm just talking about people who will like never think about like typing something about what you type, because you were obviously in a graphic design school and you're aware of writing because you love to write, and so whatever. I'm just talking about because I feel like sometimes the debate is just like, I mean, any kind of debate in the art school is always seeing by the prism that we have, and which is super hard to get out of too, that we are such a little part of the like population that is unconsciously aware of a lot of stuff that a lot of people are not aware of. And so this is why we, in my opinion, we have to make it even more like relevant for the other people, because we are like, oh yeah, but it's like common sense, you can go on Wikipedia and see it, or it's common sense, you can understand by yeah, but at the same time it's much more complicated than this.
But then shouldn't you approach the problem more in a way that you try to change the position of art in the society as not such a privileged thing, not having this superior undertone to it, rather than making art that is very easily understandable, or toning down your contemporary art to people who have not been approached by it before? Like, shouldn't you try to do it in a different way so that you change the position and change the presumptions that people have?
But I think here the privilege of art is a very, very important aspect actually of it, what comes out of it, because we're so privileged, we can have these thoughts, we can have these realizations other people don't have. And this is, so I think this is really much connected. And so you kind of have to find a way to translate it, or have to make this, like also what you were saying before about accessibility. I think it's really important to make here a distinguish here between a physical accessibility of me walking through the museum, which is super easy, or really accessibility of understanding something, which is not too easy. And this then like opens this whole levels of translations you need from this privileged bubble, which kind of needs to be there also in a way, because privilege creates research creates new thoughts, creates revolutionary, innovative thoughts, whatever.
That sounds.
Yeah, and then just finding a way to level down.
But should it be leveling down, or should it be getting rid of the concept of privilege, as in having more rights or having something more than other people? Shouldn't you make it more open in the way that you are not in a preserved bubble in the society? Then you're more a part of the society and more approachable in the sense that people don't see you as the outcast.
Yeah, but not the institution, but like I feel like the government, not the government, but like the history of like artists, as well, I mean, position of artists has changed, but the history of artists doesn't change at some point, I feel like, because nowadays it could be so easy to make it happen if everyone was aware of like what we are aware at some point. But as I said, there's no like art history introduction in education, as it is like so elitist at some point, as it seems like it's just like a bullshit money thing nowadays, all of because of this. So I feel like it's not about just like saying, oh, we have to change this. It's just like an old circle that if you change something, it's going to move here and maybe move here.
But
then,
where should you start then?
I think it has to start in art education, so it doesn't create that gap between like cliche about what art is.
But then,
so do you think that the problem truly resides in art education?
Not
resides, but I mean that it's something that can be changed from art education.
Well, it's quite a big topic, but it's just like I feel like if we do not, because nowadays it just feel like art is something that is beside. Even for myself, as a privileged person, it has always been beside, and then after in school I could take an option of art and then do. And I'm privileged in the sense that even if my parents didn't make art or whatever, I had a certain awareness of it. But for like the biggest part of the person, it's like art is something completely beside, and it has to stay like this for their whole life. And this is why art school is being seen as something so like abstract and like.
Yeah. But to me, it's not only something about like art school. I have this impression, this is not like my opinion, I'm just like voicing my own kind of suppositions or my own thoughts. Sometimes it feels that the fact that when conventional, let's say in a way like, or just like people go into a museum and look at some pieces of art, for example, with their kids or with whoever they're with, and they say, oh, my daughter of 5 years old could have done this, or I could have done this, like without a problem. There's a very cliche thing that actually this is true that people say. I'm going back like again to accessibility.
Yeah, but it's something that you can tell only happens in contemporary museum, because if you go to like super like academic and like, it's something that people never say, and that's why I say we have to work on art education, so can people understand why we arrived here nowadays into art, so people doesn't have to judge it like a random drawing, you know.
But then not art education, but education regarding art.
But I mean, like it's more like giving people an art education, than
like educating them about art, basically.
Yeah, but then, do you think it's only a matter of education?
Well, I think it all starts with a matter of education. If you talked about any kind of subject, so like either for feminism, for gender, for whatever, it's like it starts at a very early age, and also in your like.
But to me, it would be extremely interesting to go even deeper and kind of like not give the chance to contemporary art to just be valuable as it is, and go deeper and actually like question the value of contemporary art as something, you know. Because sometimes what I think is that for artists it is actually valuable to not make their art accessible. And sometimes I have the impression when I go to contemporary museums that there's just like the piece and there's just like a title, but sometimes it's extremely difficult to extract a meaning for it. And it's actually the opposite of what we do here in the school. That is just like my feelings, because sometimes I feel that when we're presenting a project in the class, actually the person that is able to make something that is not, it doesn't have to be like extremely complicated, but just something that is very, very identifiable with the concept in question, that is the project that actually gets more praise from the teacher and even from the students. But at some point, it also feels like if you reveal this intimate relationship between the work and the concept, that it also in a way loses its mystery, it loses its magic in a way, and it becomes also available for a whole other type of people or spectators.
Yeah, but I feel like it's a matter of choice. I feel like you could either get the opportunity to understand what the artist said, or either do not want to, but at least having the possibility to, otherwise it creates like a misunderstanding, because it really depends if you are either a really like not impulsive, but like more like I don't know what's it called, but like if you're more like feeling with your heart or feeling with your mind at some point, like in the way you want to understand things, it can be really frustrating otherwise, and it creates a big misunderstanding about contemporary art. And you were saying like, I just feel like at some points art changed, but the museums didn't change that much, because if you look at a contemporary art museum and a classical art museum, it's just like typically the same presentation and stuff, but it's like always it could be bring back to this time at like political and religious context, whatever. But here it's like absent, like it's just absent. So I just feel like I totally get your point. Sometimes you just don't want to have any information, so you can be more like in a personal approach of it. But I feel like if you want to, so yeah, of course you can go on your smartphone, look at it.
No, I think that there should have been more information.
Yeah, so just
I think it should be more accessible.
But also I think we're really generalizing.
Yeah.
So many museums are very good at
like
curating.
K21, for instance, I think is a brilliant example of making people enjoy contemporary art.
There's some where it works really well, but for the biggest part of it, from what I've seen so far, but it's just my example. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you just visited lots of where it was perfectly curated and explained, but
it still means that like there is a change going on. Like it's not in a standstill, and like the one thing is making people enjoy the art, but the other thing is informing people of something they didn't know. And if a person doesn't know about contemporary art or anything regarding the movement, then they will create knowledge from the things they hear from popular media and so on. So if you don't know something, then you generate your own knowledge, and that's generally like negative and primitive.
But do you understand it's well curated and explained from your personal point of view as a privileged person in art school, or as a like random person willing to go to the museum?
I think it's very easy to understand when you're in a museum, even if you're an art student, whether it's an so-called accessible display or not. Like it's not only regarding your position, but it's a huge difference. And I don't think like art students or people involved in the art world are the only ones who notice the difference.
I think so as well, because I think there are some works in museums where you also, like if you can be any art student, you can be an expertise in some way of art, but as soon as you don't know anything about this special artist or this special project, you can't access the work. And this is, for example, what you could see a lot in the photography exhibition was this autumn in here in Amsterdam.
Foam?
No, it was not a foam. It was at the Westerdijk, Wester Park, something. Eric gave me the ticket to that.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
I cannot remember the name. It was this huge photography exhibition, and I went there, and you would just see all the photographs in a kind of pavilion, and nowhere was any explanation, nothing.
Yeah.
But if you would talk to the people there, they would explain you. And you would find out a lot about the work, and it suddenly became shape, it suddenly makes sense, it suddenly got in content you could relate to. Yeah. And I thought, but a lot of people I saw just walking around, and also I for myself, I had to search for the person to ask to, and then I had to consider, is it now worth starting a communication about this art piece So I already had to make a choice before even knowing about what I choose.
Yeah.
And I think this what you were saying before about this magic behind the art piece is generated a lot through denying people a direct access through work, because as soon as you get in contact with it and actually find out stuff about it, it loses magic. It becomes content, and you can kind of start reflecting on it.
But then you also appreciate it more.
Yeah, of course, it's a great thing. It's a great thing, but it also takes this like mystical vibe around art, and then people might also start.
But doesn't it completely depend on what you're looking at?
I was also going to say we're talking about very different things. We're talking about, we jump from massive public art institutions to like a gallery opening, and those are very different things in terms of accessibility, in terms of the crowd, and they, frankly, I don't think that like a gallery has to have the same kind of public aim as like a government funded massive state. No, but I'm just saying that like,
but it wasn't a gallery. It was a photography festival, but
it
like
was
international.
Definitely, it had a gallery vibe because
but
they
it
wanted to sell. It was mainly to sell the photographs.
Oh yeah,
so
yeah. That's also. But what I'm saying, like, it's. I think like when we talk about those things, and you have to like specify what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because like gallery versus commercial gallery versus art museum versus like independent, I don't know, festival or something. Those are all very different things that target very different audiences, and whose like curatorial work really determines like the public outreach, and those are very different things.
Aren't we also like in general here putting like this kind of knowledge, which is our kind of like what we're interested in, so I mean art, we're all here, like above anything else, which I don't know, like we don't have access to different kinds of, like, just to take an example, say like scientific things which are going on, and the people who are interested in that would also consider that kind of knowledge to be the most important to society, and or one of some among the most beneficial things, but it doesn't have to be accessible to everyone, and not everybody has to be interested in it for it to still exist. Like there can be some kind of, I don't know, people have to specialise.
Yeah, but it's more of a question also, I feel like, of I don't know what's the English for that, but reconnaissance.
Recognition.
Recognition, in the sense that if you look at in French, for example, it's just like when you do like a literature study and then you do research in literature, you have so much like few sponsors and people getting interested in what you're doing. And if you do like mathematic like high classes, and then you go to certain class, and then you go to do a thesis and stuff like this, you have so much like financialization, like research. So I think it's more about the question also of like, of course it doesn't have to be accessible to everyone, but it's just have to make it like not a less valuable things.
No, I completely agree.
In the people's mind.
Yeah.
Because this is not like, I'm not saying people think it's accessible in the way like, oh, it's too difficult for me. Like you could say for mathematics, it's just like, oh, it's hard, like it's something that is besides, and like it's only for
stigmatized in a way.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's true. Even like my parents have like a very strong, perception of like what art is, but even further like what artists are. There's like this traditional fear of what like artists are supposed to be, and how they're supposed to behave, and what their personalities are, right?
And do you not think that we all like conform to those?
To be honest, I really don't.
Okay.
No, I don't think so either.
I really don't.
I think it's quite different. I think it would be really different if you, like, it's interesting, for example, at Duo or somewhere like this. I don't know if I have to explain, but but like where you have like I can't remember, like on the first like night we were there, you have all these computer science students, and they are really, they, to a certain extent, all this like stereotypes are true. Like you have different, of course there are loads and loads of different sorts of people here, but they're also recognisably a type of person as compared to a computer science student.
But to be honest, like what I referred also to is that people had always like associated art students with people from low morals, you know, in this very like traditional sense, you know, like low low morals and low way of acting, and like kind of dirty and kind of like, you know what I mean? And sometimes I feel like, at least what I have experienced, obviously there's a very like personal opinion, but the people that I encounter here are extremely exceptional in like human value, which many times doesn't happen with obviously these are just like generalizations.
But where does the low morals thing come from? Like
the moral things?
I've like never I don't associate this.
You have never associated that? Like art people are people that make do drugs.
Oh, art students especially.
Art students do drugs. Art students have a very promiscuous kind of, or artists in general are like bohemian, you know, they don't care about like living on the street. It's just like very it's a very isn't this a common
but food, I think this also makes sense in terms of when you think of us questioning morals and questioning ethics and questioning if it might not be too bad to live on the street, like maybe that works out, let's see.
Of course,
and just being open to that, I think, makes with people who are very much valuing their morals and very much holding on them in daily life and also needing them very much.
Absolutely.
Is of course a completely strange thing.
No, but because I'm not talking about the things that these people that are like stereotyped like us with is bad or not. I'm just trying to bring light on the fact that they exist. They are there.
It's more seen as marginals.
No, and I was just wanting to say they have this is maybe why they come up.
Yeah.
So.
But then I don't also, I mean, I'm sure all these things, you know, exist, but then you can say that about any other student. But I think the main thing, and like to bring it back to the question privilege and responsibility, I think a big thing is what I experience with lots of my friends who don't study art and don't have particular interest in art, who are also very much privileged and educated, like, you know what I mean, just people who also study whatever other things, people our age, people who go to parties and take drugs and whatever, and who might also not really have any sense of purpose. But the main thing for art school is lots of people are like, oh, but like, what do you actually do? You know what I mean? It's more like, what are you actually being... And that's the thing, like, what are we being taught here? Lots of things, but also you could, from a very, like, practical standpoint, you can say nothing. Because you can get away with very little. In the same way you can get away with very little in any education. But still, you know what I mean? It doesn't have... especially contemporary art schools, because they really don't have the same, they don't have a comparable educational structure, which is why I think it's also, that's the other thing, where like people really don't know what you actually do. And that's, I think, the main stereotype in that sense, or not stereotype, whatever, is that like you kind of do nothing. And you therefore you like claim. That's what I mean.
But this again comes back to accessibility and how.
And it's also like about like I was showing a video on YouTube an advertisement that I found. It's like a boy who made a startup, and he's actually selling his design skills. Drawing skills, and he's making publicity like, hey, do you want to be an artist? I can teach you how to draw. And he draws like
amazing
super
art.
like exactly. And it's just like, I've seen this website, there's a lot of people like actually paying for it and being like, oh, thanks to him I'm an artist now, you know, whatever. And it just shows nowadays like how people are not aware at all of what's happening in art school. And of course it can be really abstract for people who have like really, because we are privileged, we don't maybe to forget about this like really concrete problematic stuff about like making a proper thing which you can get money from to pay your rent and whatever, like, so it's just like it's so abstract for people. So it's communication problem, but I feel like it's same in the same round. It's like if we had this like part of art and education, people would feel more like, okay, being an art student is not something easy. Being an art student is a choice. Being an art student is hard. Being an art student is risky, but it's something, you know. It's not like the B plan or something like this.
Are you talking about the B plan because of this woman that in this interview she said that on the French TV, have you seen this video?
No, I don't.
It's a French I think she's a writer or something. She was invited in the talk show, and she basically explains why, in her opinion, being an artist is the plan B of people who failed at being lawyers or doctors
Is she an
or
artist herself?
architects. No, she's not an artist. But that's what she says. She's like, oh yeah, you know, artists become an artist because they failed at becoming what they dreamt of becoming when they were kids, such as lawyers. That's exactly what she says.
That's weird because people usually say
Yeah,
the opposite.
Yeah, that's why her thinking scheme is super strange because she like lists all those very corporate
She had a really
jobs.
strange childhood.
I mean, I could understand that you are like being when you're a kid, you have like this will to become a doctor and like save the world. But become a lawyer or like really, I don't know. Her theory was really weird, but
city planner.
I could more like understand if you want to become a doctor and then you can't get in and then you go into humanities,
Yeah.
but not art.
Yeah.
Like,
It's so extreme. I don't
But
know.
I could imagine that it's related to the idea that at an art school you don't have to work as hard as you have to when you study law.
Yeah, but the
Because
difference
of-
is that when you
No,
work in an art, when you work in an art school, like you don't have like really a schedule, and like even though
I think it's
no,
true.
that's not what I wanted to say. Like you just work in completely
I
different
think
ways.
it's true.
Yeah, you don't work as hard.
I think it's true because
I
you know
agree.
I have a bachelor in psychology.
Yeah,
I know both worlds.
Yeah.
I know both sides. I know the truth. I think that
No, but I can.
sorry, not sorry, but it depends also on what you want to give work
Yeah.
meaning. You know,
yeah.
that is also like in the conventional sense of work. Then you know,
Yeah,
studying,
that's-
for example, medicine is more work.
Yeah.
But if you understand work as something different, as something more personal and like more as a self-discovery kind of path, then
It's
definitely
harder.
art
That's a
is
massive
way
You have to
harder.
confront yourself.
Because you
way
have to
more.
confront yourself, and the emotional kind of like effort you need to invest in when you're working on studying art is definitely like it doesn't have,
That's a massive privilege.
that is still a massive privilege.
It's a
of
massive
course
privilege
it
to be
is.
like, I'm working so hard. Like,
On myself.
I'm not in vibe. I'm just taking piss out of each other at this point.
It's just
But like, it's just been like,
Of course.
this project is really draining me. It's really hard to just.
No, it is
Because- yeah.
it is a
take
privilege
so much
because
time.
finally you're just working hard, but it's all this work is gonna end up on
Yeah.
you and growing as a person, and then
Yeah.
what is your responsibility in society? Because you might show some ideas that you got by exploring yourself, but
But it
then
goes
what?
back to the debate. It's like, okay, so you have this all work to do, and it's mainly about like your comprehension of the world and stuff like this, and this is a super privileged stuff. So what do you do about it?
Yeah.
It brings back to, okay, so what will you do about it? Because I just want to ask you the questions because I am kind of like working on it right now. It's more like I'm just trying to like study a bit like the correlation between history and history of art. And I just feel like, do we even have a responsibility in the sense that regarding like the fact that we might be working on like recent events, like, I mean, I don't know, I mean, my question is like, is art the precursor of history, or is like art just coming after history? So if it is coming after history, like any kind of context, then what is our responsibility? Are we just like illustrating the fact, or are we like trying to pointing out something? But then, what are we pointing out? Because we're such a few like minority in the world trying to say something, and there's such a few people who have access to what we are doing. So like, I mean, are we really like doing something?
But I think that's where you have to also make difference between different movements or different aspects of making art. And one is what you just said, how do you say, picture what's going on or picture what already happened. So kind of art in a kind of educational sense, where you're like, hey, this looks like that, and I perceive it like that. And then a sense of education and communication. And then again, in a way of art as research, when it's even about identity. What are we? What are we
But even
doing?
this research, are not they made of something that happened already? Like, I mean,
Yeah, it is. But I think through, like, if you see it as this like us all provided by knowledge, by environment and everything around from the world which is already existing, and then making new combinations through exploring, through making researches, can lead to a kind of innovation, can lead to a process. And then of course it's a universal question if there is such as process, if there is such as innovation, or if everything is just another way of combining things. But I think if you can maybe name it growth, in a way, it is definitely happening in this way when you start researching.
Yeah, but then my question is like regarding like how few people does that interest. I mean, it's not a reason for not doing a battle anyway. It's not because you just have only 2 persons by your side, but it's just like then. It's like, do you even like? I'm being like the bad part of the dialogue, but do you really have to have responsibilities regarding the fact that actually your voice might not be worth nothing at the end? You know what I mean? Because here, like, we're talking such as like if our art was worth something in the way that we're talking like about people showing in gallery, showing in museums, people that are well known for doing such a thing and such a thing. But like, what is your responsibility from your position of like an artist that is just working on its own and doesn't have any visibility? I mean, like, is the responsibility worth something at the end? No. So that's what I mean.
But are you also like focusing on the fact that, for example, art is something that isn't that much of an interest for everyone else?
Yeah, it's a detail that makes like the fact that any of your actions finally doesn't have the impact, depends, but might not have any impact at all.
Yeah, but
I think also,
sorry.
Yeah, I think also the impact your work has on the world you can never really guide, you can never really determine. So this is when then, for example, like talking of big artists, Mozart is just appreciated after his death, because he was like kind of, people say he's an avant-garde, but maybe just the things was not, like his environment was not right, people couldn't understand yet what he was doing. And then a few years later people suddenly can. And maybe if someone else would have been elected in that kind of blah blah blah, this all wouldn't have happened. So what I'm saying is basically that no matter what you're doing, what actually it's gonna create and generate in the world is not in your hands. So then this is also the question, if I have an aim to generate a very specific thing, can I actually reach that, or is it really more about just having the aim to generate what I can do with whilst being passionate about it? Mm-hmm. So I think this is also what we learn here in our education a lot, being passionate about our work, always find a way to handle an assignment in a way we feel like, that's what I want to do.
I think that's true. I think like part of the responsibility we have is like engaging with stuff and like being the most interested in it that we can be. But the other thing that I think that like you can possibly think about, especially in like somewhere like the Rietveld, where it seems like it is very like self-sustaining, sort of like it feeds into its own bubble in that it employs a lot of its own students as like teachers and like all of like this way, is it actually okay to some extent to just exist, like definitely at this stage, just within that bubble and like to contribute to the people around us? We're already by being here and by being engaged like in classes and by making things, we're giving something to the people who we interact with, and
that's true, and
that's already valuable in a way.
Yeah, then how do you measure, like when does it start that you've given back enough? Like how do you say that you're doing it right or you're doing it wrong? Like, is it from the point where you have tried, as you said, or is it from the point that you have succeeded?
But also, in a way, I find interesting coming back again to the fact of that art is something that is maybe not as connected with society as it should. That, you know, it sparks to me that there is a fashion department, for example, here in the Rietveld, you know, and fashion is so marketable and such like a big trend and such a thing that every single one is interested about. Maybe like the answer is just to make art more marketable, more visible. Yeah, exactly. Maybe that's I don't know. I'm just like thinking out loud.
Well, like for the but I think this could like come back to the thing we had before about like accessibility and how it shouldn't necessarily be like that's like I think in that idea you're implying that it should become easy. And like
Not
I think
easy.
that everybody likes likable is already kind of like an issue. Like you shouldn't necessarily have to make things that are likable.
About the fashion? I didn't understand.
No, my point was just like to compare two interesting things in my opinion. That fashion is also considered in a way art. Like for example, in the school there is a fashion department, and to me it was very interesting to compare the fact that fashion is so deeply ingrained with the society as a whole. Every single thing, even people that are not interested in fashion are interested in fashion. Do you know what I mean? But it doesn't happen that much with art. And I was trying to, in a way, compare these two things and how these two dynamics work.
But should it happen? Like we have seen
know.
how. Yeah, I don't know either. But like if we look at how fashion, what has happened to fashion, like. Fast fashion, the industry being very controversial with almost everything they do regarding starting from responsibility towards the environment and ending with political responsibility. Then like is it something that should happen to art? Like do we want it to degrade so much that it's like a commercial product in everybody's lives?
But I think that like also the comparison you're making is like doesn't really make sense because like surely just that the kind of fashion department here is not like popular fashion
it's
in
not like
any
fashion.
way. Like that's like comparing like some like commercial art or like I don't know like posters or cartoons or something that everybody consumes all the time to like contemporary art.
But
It's
okay,
like a similar
you're right.
comparison.
I was wrong. But the only no, it's true. The only thing is that the thing that has been missing here for me is that we haven't actually come up with any true solutions of like how to make art more ingrained, more present in modern society.
But I think we were just really close to that because we were just no
Ding ding.
no because also what you were just mentioning, you said before if your work is like kind of successful when you succeeded or when you were really engaged in that process. And I think the success of your work you really can't measure because you don't know what happens to your work once it gets in the outer world. You don't know how people will respond, how people will understand, whatever is gonna happen with that. Whatever, like everything can happen. And so the only thing you can really measure in this way is are you engaged in your work? And I think this is for now, or maybe like for us in our state, is the only thing we can kind of respond to a responsibility, which is to say, hey, okay, we have all this privilege, we have all these possibilities. Let's see that we get engaged, that we also get motivated about our work, and energized about our work.
It doesn't make the art more like linked to any way to the external world. I mean, it's super nice to be super like motivated on your own room and like with your own stuff, but it doesn't make it more like. And I'm not saying it has to be related to the world, but the reasons why I feel like there's such a gap is also because like art school also choose to be so like far from.
But that's what I'm also kind of trying to understand is that you say it should also be related to your work. Let's start with it's about our motivation now. So I think for a lot of us it's also we get more excited about our work when there is such as a relation to the outer world. For others, they get more excited about their work when they can sit in their room and study paint and study light. And so you already have different shades of or different approaches of getting excited about our work, getting engaged. And some of them will directly be connected to the outer world, be connected to making art, maybe social or political or whatever. And but then what I also try to understand is can you actually control the impact your art has on the outer world, and I don't think you can. So the only thing you can control is that you are excited about your work, that you feel like your work makes sense, that you feel like you're doing the best you can in that sense.
But even when you're doing the best that you can, I feel like, I don't know, particularly like in my experience in my class, sometimes I feel like sometimes when the people are the most motivated, like the most like excited about their work, sometimes when they present it to the class, it doesn't have like the same repercussion as someone that wasn't that, you know, motivated or engaged with their work, but maybe had like something and suddenly like it worked out when they presented it, and the prof and the teacher said, this is great, you know, this is really good.
Surely how that's about how like well we're communicating, and like that's something that we're learning to do here. Like that's why we're here doing art, is because it's useful to like see what happens when we get feedback from, I don't know, I mean,
yeah, of course, and but I agree with you,
yeah.
But at the same time what I'm trying to say is that maybe the engaging is not like
not necessarily the same.
But what I meant with engaging is also like, I don't know if that's the issue with what you were just describing, but also before that was said that we can, like, it's easy to deliver something which is kind of good, so it's easy to make one's way through here, like in any other studies. I think Masha said it before. And so if that person you just mentioned, or like if the person, which could be any one of us, is, I mean, you can be engaged with your work and still not sure what you're actually doing. That's when you doubt a lot, but that's also when you take serious what you're doing.
Yeah, you're right.
And I think so. The engaged is part of it. Being engaged.
Yeah, you're right.
And also, I think there is like obviously completely different approaches that mean that sometimes something really good, someone can come up with something which is really like useful and good and interesting to other people when they might not have engaged with it in the way, the same way that we're talking about. Like they might not be like working on it all the time or be like intense or excited about it, but that's just a different working process. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe that's not true.
Yeah, but it's interesting.